managers aren't equipped for this. Many of them are overworked. They're thinking about the thousand of the other things that they need to manage in a day. And it's just a completely unfair ask. It creates that division. It creates that break in experiences that ends up happening across different customer experiences. And it just doesn't work.
And this, I just talked a moment ago how this works across industries, and Tamar's shared experiences from financial services and from, animal nutrition and, Hi, I'm Matt Egol, host of the CX and Culture Connection, the podcast for leaders looking to drive value by focusing on their customer experience and culture together. I'm excited to speak today with Tamar Cohen, founder of HaloEffect, which is focused on the intersection of customer and employee experience. Prior to launching HaloEffect, Tamar held CX leadership roles at Travelers, Zoetis, and Citi. Thanks for coming on the podcast, Tamar.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
We're going to have a lot of fun. I always really enjoy our conversations, and I'm really excited that we're teaming together in the market more now.
Yeah. I think this will be a wonderful, wonderful partnership. I'm very excited.
So you've had CX leadership roles at, Zoetis and Travelers and Citi. Why did you launch HaloEffect?
Yeah, look, at the end of the day, I love the work. I was brought in at Citi, Zoetis, really almost all of my roles to come in to start the function. So really coming in as, employee number one, blank sheet of paper, and then to really build it out. And I realized that's really what I love to do. I love the opportunity to really just do that deep exploration, really set the foundations, do all of the work to not only get the function up and running, but to really kind of build the culture, to really kind of get that excitement around the function. That's what I really enjoy doing. It's born out of, a little bit of history just in my past. I came from digital strategy, went into what we called at the time omni-channel customer experience, and then ultimately into EX. But throughout that time, there was a lot of really fantastic opportunities that I've had along the way. Back in 2008, we participated in studies on how people thought about their finances, when they thought about their finances, the emotions that they had, what drives them, and that was, 2008. People were not really talking about this en masse like they are today. And so to really sort of be at the forefront of understanding how behaviors drive our actions and seeing how that then manifests in the different experiences, that was really just such a learning experience for me. And then again in 2021, when I became the head of EX, that was having a front row seat to some of the biggest changes, at least in my history, that I was ever seeing. We had the Great Resignation at the time. We had all of the fallout around George Floyd, return to office. These were massive changes, and really for the first time, employees having a voice and businesses really stopping and saying, okay, what can we do to make sure that we're retaining our employees and we're making sure that they're delivering their best? 2023, things started to change, right? We started to see a lot more RTO. We started to see a lot more language around employees having a little less control. There was definitely a lot of sort of conversations in the marketplace. And now I think we've sort of lost the thread. We're seeing just a lot of language around 60 hours a week being the, productivity sweet spot, that came out earlier this week. Drive for more, masculinity in the marketplace, and so I think what's happening is we're starting to see EX almost getting thought of and CX being thought of almost as the zero-sum game, right? If we're delivering for our customers, for our employees, then we can't be productive, right? So what I really wanted to do, and the reason why I really was inspired to start the company, is I wanted to really just get that narrative back, just to be able to say, listen, the way to drive long-term success, long-term productivity is by leaning in and getting these experiences right. So that was really the Kickstarter for me.
I've always been excited to team together and learn from you, from your passion about how CX and EX go together. And it's really cool to see how that really is driving your motivation in launching HaloEffect. And, I agree it's a false trade-off, the between CX and EX, and that often the best customer experiences are because your employees are delivering those peaks in the customer journey through their behavior. That is the CX and culture connection, is how your employees show up and deliver the customer experience, and the way they bring their full selves to work and the way they collaborate on delivering the customer experience, which is like more of the indirect effect on CX. It's so powerful. And, you can't really drive impact at a company and bring your mission, vision, and purpose to life if you don't focus on CX and EX holistically together.
No, absolutely not. And having sat in both of the roles, I really see how the two are almost required to be together. When I was starting the CX role at Zoetis, I charged ahead and did my, role as a good corporate citizen to build out the listening functions and all of the CX work. But I really quickly saw that if I didn't have the employees with me, if they didn't understand what we were doing, how we were doing things, I was not going to be successful. Furthermore, we started getting a lot of feedback of, well, how do I do this? I don't understand in my day to day. We started doing ride alongs and really understanding deeply, this is the employee experience. This is where they need to actually make adjustments. But by the way, this is also where we need to adjust because they cannot deliver. And so, and then even at Travelers, we did a lot of work to bring together the employee experience within the customer work. So as we were doing journeys, we were really bringing in employee voice, understanding if there was a challenge in one spot in the journey, is there actually something going on internally that we need to look at and maybe resolve first. They really, really go hand in hand. And I think that's what gets forgotten a lot of the time. And that's where, we're really leaning in on the halo effect side.
What's really exciting about what you're talking about, Tamar, is that your approach to EX is not just only an HR lens around like the hire to retire and treat more like a parallel approach to EX. So what a lot of companies do with EX, which is useful, is they apply the same repertoire of human-centered design and listening and other tools and methods to EX that they do to CX, but they're happening in parallel. And they take a hire to retire lens for the moments that matter. And what we're talking about here is the union of actually thinking about the employees along the customer journey and actually thinking of them like personas, just like you do customers, and thinking about experience design holistically to include the customers and employees, and then thinking about the culture and behavior of your employees, not just designing the experience.
Exactly. And, I think just like what we said before, it's not binary, right? It's not like this is the right way and this is the wrong way. This is really about getting that broad understanding and then bringing it to a full application. So when we talk about employee experience, yes, you do need to do those journeys and you do need to get a good understanding of what's actually happening from acquisition all the way through exit. Though that's essential to know because that's the only way that you're going to get to those answers of what's actually happening, where are the challenges, how do we optimize, and sort of find those productivity breaks. But then the application, and I think this is where the opportunity is in many organizations, how do you bring that essentially the ROI to EX? Well, you have to bring that connection to customer experience. Many CX journeys do lead with that sort of front of house and back of house. But what's actually happening is they're looking at almost like the ideal state of what's happening, what needs to be happening with regards to the employees. How should they be applying these different journeys? But if there's bureaucracies that are blocking ways that employees can actually execute, if the systems aren't updated, if they're metriced in ways and measured in ways that aren't geared towards these new customer journeys, it's never going to work. And so it really needs to be brought together to understand, okay, here's everything that we know about employees from doing those employee journeys. Here's where we know we have challenges. We map it back to what's happening on the customer side. And now we can also more easily see maybe this is why there's a certain break. We don't actually have to revise the customer journey. We have to revise what's going on internally. So it allows also for a bit more prescriptive approaches to how we do the work, a little bit stronger prioritization on those final journeys.
Well, to make this, I think, really practical for the audience, what we're saying is one, when you build a journey and you think about the personas going through the journey, consider not only the customers, but the employees. And when you think about the love points and pain points, you can consider then also what are the love points and pain points for the employees as the customer goes on the journey. And if you then ideate improvement opportunities to drive improvements in the customer experience, and you're going to take a people, process, and tech lens. Say you're using Agile and you have epics and stories. So some of the stories will be people, some will be process, some will be tech, which naturally allows you to find the place. To Tamar's point, sometimes it's a people issue that the people don't have the right data or they don't have the right training or whatever it is that's getting in the way, or there's a process issue, or a tech issue. And sometimes you're fixing things from the employee's lens, which and then enables you to deliver something better for the customer.
100%. I think a lot of the challenges that we saw on the customer side when I was leading CX was in many times it just came back to different processes. I remember one of the biggest challenges we found when I first started in my CX role was customer complaints about certain deliveries. And we were able to bring it back to a distribution center and then bringing it back further to the way that teams are being incented and what was actually on their leadership dashboards. It was more about how quickly do we get something packaged and to the front door, not actually delivered to the customer, right? So there was really nothing necessarily wrong with what was happening on the customer journey side. We were just incenting the wrong things and we were driving behaviors that led to ultimately inefficient customer experiences.
And you and I also, one of the things I think that we are aligned on is that the reason why EX and CX go together is because emotion is so important in the customer experience, and that the way your employees connect to the mission, vision, purpose of the company is what creates that emotional energy in your company. And in fact, you have the 4 E's around educate, empower, engage, and energize, which energy is right there in one of the E's. That culture is all about boosting energy in a company. You want to share more about the 4 E's?
Yeah, no, happily. I mean, the 4 E's is really important to me because that really is the crux of experience, right? Whether it's, the human experience. And when we sort of bring it back to employees, what creates that energy? What actually gets somebody motivated to deliver and to produce and to, show that excitement? It's not demanding that you're in the office for 60 hours a week. That's not going to do it. That's actually just going to yield a lot of resentful, let me do enough to not get fired energy. But, the 4 E's, the first one, educate, as you said, that's about training. That's about personal development, leadership, really being able to grow from the moment you step in all the way through your career, to be able to learn, to grow, to develop. Empower is really deeply understanding the journeys that employees go through, understanding where those roadblocks are. During a lot of the research that we did on different journeys, we were surprised so often as to where some of the breaks were. Just sometimes it was policies that were just wonky and weird, or this is how we've always done things, or this is a legal requirement when actually it never was. And just sometimes just taking out these simple moments, really help to rev up behaviors and energy. The third is engage. So how do we listen? How do we really understand how employees are connecting to the culture, and how do we make sure that we're incenting the behaviors, right, through recognition and really highlighting what we want those behaviors to be. And then that leads to the fourth E, which is energize, which is to get that energy and that momentum and to sustain it, right? Once the employees are kind of in that good place, how do we recognize it? How do we continue to, enforce it, and then have that energy continue through?
100%. And I think that what makes this powerful is that it's not just a CX team at the center of the company. You've led those teams. but you haven't approached it just as what are you doing to design a website or design a new product. You're thinking about how to energize and engage the whole organization. And we talk about it as sparking a movement. You're building a cultural movement, and that's where I'm so excited to partner together. And we've talked about this as like having three stages. Like sparking your movement is the first stage, focusing your energy and amplifying your energy, like you were talking about, boosting the energy. And what do you think really makes that first phase successful around sparking the movement at the company?
It's interesting. I think I've seen culture programs in probably about 100 different ways in my career. And I think the most important thing around getting that spark is, first of all, you have to be very, very clear. There's a sort of a structure that I had used previously where, you name it, define it, and align it. So to be very specific, to be, very prescriptive about what do we stand for, who are we, what do we want to do, what do we want to accomplish, and then get that written on paper, right? We, then defining it, what are those behaviors that we expect and we want to see? And then aligning it is reinforcing it, whether it's through a recognition or an incentive program throughout the organization. So, I've worked in organizations where we had, very clear behaviors and culture values, I should say, that were actually, written. They were written on walls. They were on the website, so clients could see them. They were really published everywhere. And anyone you could stop in the hallway at any given moment, and they could name the 5 behaviors, values rather, off the top of their head. There was also a recognition program behind it. So there were very clear behaviors to understand, how do you know when you're actually hitting those marks? What does it actually mean when you are achieving value X, Y, and Z? And so there was a very, very intentional approach that really did create that spark. So people understood, they were motivated, they wanted to be part of this. I've also worked in organizations where culture was less defined. It sort of became a bit of a word salad on a page, and it creates a lot of confusion. What it does is it creates a lot of pockets in the organization, some that sort of figure it out on their own. They've maybe created their own value statements, and they've actually created that spark individually within sort of their silo. But then you'll have a team that's probably sitting in the offices right next door, sort of looking over and saying, well, I'm not experiencing any of that. So organizationally, it just doesn't work, and you're creating that break. And so you've got some teams energized and other teams that are struggling.
Yeah, what you're highlighting is that there's multiple levels here to building alignment around the strategy and the culture. And I'm going to share with the audience now something that we're working on together, which is the Value Accelerator, the CX and Culture Connection Value Accelerator. The audience can learn more on the website for JourneySpark if you look at our Value Accelerator page. But it's something I'm teaming on with Tamar, and it's got 3 modules. And this is part of the spark your movement phase to build the right insights at different levels. There's the leaders, the managers, and the customers, right? So the first module is strategy, and that's to help get alignment across your leaders down to your mid-level managers of what is our CX vision, how are we aiming to create value. We'll talk about a focus on better, faster, cheaper. What's the brand promise we're trying to deliver? And are we aligned in what we're trying to do across the different functions, the different geographies, different business units? Like, do we have a clear approach to customer experience? We can all row in the same direction, right? That's the strategy module. The second module is around culture, which Tamar was talking about. Are we clear about the behaviors we want, either directly from our employees to show up in the customer journey to deliver the experience, or indirectly for the way they work on things with agility, design thinking, quality management as cornerstone disciplines, for example? You can actually test with our cultural alignment module. Is your culture aligned to your strategy? So you have the strategy module, the culture module, and then the voice of the customer module is a way to quickly assess whether the customers see you delivering on your brand promise. Are you actually delivering what you say you want to deliver, and where are the gaps? As well as what are the emotions that you want to deliver, and are you getting them, right? Um, and having these three modules up front in your Spark Your Movement phase allows you to have a series of workshops with your leaders to get them engaged around, where to focus and how to prioritize things and what ideas get sparked from that to build out on your roadmap, as well as which behaviors to focus on for the change management and actually getting the right approaches. We call it a system of change to bring those behaviors to life in the organization. We're teaming on, and Tamar has a lot of experience operating the team. I've worked as a consultant, and we're together. We're going to help companies decide their strategy, pick the right behaviors, and then scale the cultural movement in the organization. And getting those insights up front is key.
Yeah, I think that the behavior piece is the one that is probably the most overlooked. I think a lot of organizations understand that they need to get clear on a mission, and they'll spend a lot of money to develop a brand and a mission vision and put it on a piece of paper and then sort of deliver it. But really getting clear on what, not only just even the behaviors, but what is the mindset? What does it look like? What does it feel like? How do we know that it's actually getting delivered on? There's a lot of sort of loose language that can be devised about it, but getting really specific and clear about, we want employees to, I'm trying to remember, some examples of when I was leading CX, we had a series of behaviors with one of them being run it like you own it. So what does that actually mean, right? It's very easy to sort of interpret, but basically it meant that we're all owners and we all need to understand that the customers of the organization are our customers. And so how do we make sure that we're always showing up ready? How do we make sure that the customers have exactly what they need so that they can make the appropriate decisions, that they're supported so that they don't feel like they're abandoned at the end of a sale? That we are, delivering all the information that we have. We're not hiding anything. We're delivering on that trust, and we're delivering on that expertise that we as an organization, intend to deliver. And so getting very, very clear and then reinforcing that along the way was really what helped.
What I've seen with clients is that there's usually a cornerstone discipline. Like, for example, at one tech company, we picked quality management as a cornerstone discipline. With another materials science company, we picked agility as a cornerstone discipline. With a financial services company, we picked design thinking as a cornerstone discipline. There's not one right answer. It actually depends on your culture. And with that tech company as an example, we focused on the intersection of quality and customer experience and got $100 million in quality savings by driving the right behaviors into the organization. And that we decided to focus on quality first before expanding to innovation or other things, because it was at the core of who they were, and there's a lot of momentum and buy-in around quality. With the material sciences company, we focused on agility and how to get them to do things faster, and we, things like launching their new e-commerce portal in less than 6 months, launching their customer collaboration portal with very agile approaches. And we drove over $50 million in benefits from launching those initiatives, in the business case. So I think having a cornerstone discipline is key. But what you can see there, and like Tamar and I are both talking about this, is that the rubber meets the road in the behaviors. And unless you actually drive adoption of the behaviors into the organization, this is why Drucker said culture eats strategy for breakfast. If you don't actually drive the behaviors, you don't get impact.
100%. I mean, because I've seen it go the other way as well. When you sort of just leave it up to individual managers to sort of try and figure it out, managers aren't equipped for this. Many of them are overworked. They're thinking about the thousand of the other things that they need to manage in a day, and it's just a completely unfair ask. It creates that division. It creates that break in experiences that ends up happening across different customer experiences, and it just doesn't work. It just
And
doesn't.
this, I just talked a moment ago how this works across industries, and Tamar's shared experiences from financial services and from, animal nutrition and, um, the like Zoetis. But this also works across different company sizes. We've worked with companies that are from 500 employees to 5,000 employees to 50,000 employees. This is not a big company play. In fact, a lot of the smaller companies, it's easier because often they're founder led. They've had much more focus on culture. And what happens is when you go from smaller to bigger, you lose your coherence, you lose your focus, or the companies have started to build bad habits. This is about habits. And that we're trying to is restore a focus on a clear set of behaviors and the right system of change to reinforce those behaviors.
Yeah, I was actually working with a very small startup, and one of the conversations we had was exactly that, which is we just started a lot of the work with who do you want to be? What do you stand for? Let's get that on paper. And even though, the founders were saying, well, we know and we know what we want when we see it, like nobody else will. And by the way, that's going to change over time. And you're going to be confronted with different situations that will put that to the test every time. You need to be able to get very, very clear so that A, you know what you're abiding by, even as you grow, as you scale, as you run into challenges, as you hire, because not everybody's going to have that same passion or buy-in as you will. And then you can start to talk about what you expect and how that manifests through the rest of your organization. So we actually spend a lot of time building that as actually one of the very, very first things before we even started talking about customer personas and journeys and all the rest of it.
There's two great tastes that go great together: the chocolate and the peanut butter that go together, right? One school of thought is we need to come up with great creative ideas around what's the way to bring the strategic vision to life through the right prioritized opportunities that we ideate, test, and scale, and we're basically creating stuff. It could be a website, a new product, a new business model. And there's a lot of opportunity to apply design thinking and lean startup thinking to do this well. And you can jumpstart the process by doing personas and journeys and then getting everyone together. And that's valuable, right? And I've talked with past guests like Jim Keen um, and others about like how do you think about experience and designing great experiences and using this type of an approach. Um, Another school of thought, which is the peanut butter, the chocolate, is that you can focus in on the culture lens, and that what you really want to do is figure out the way to change the way people work, the way people collaborate, the way people work on things, which is high leverage to achieve the other things. And really what you want is both. And so when we do the spark your movement approach, not only can we use the tools to figure out, is there strategic alignment? Is there cultural alignment? Does the voice of the customer insights concur that you have, you're to get additional insight about where you're focused and what emotions to focus on? But you can layer on persona and journeys also if you don't already have them, which will make much stronger insights in the spark your movement phase to align on the strategy and the behaviors.
What I found is very often the kickstart is, what's on fire, right? And usually that's when the organization will come to you and sort of say, like, we have an urgent issue that we need to resolve. So there's another, again, a smaller organization that we worked with that came to us with a very clear client problem, and actually an employee problem is what it was based on. The employees quitting at rates that I had never seen before. They had a huge challenge internally. And we said to them, this is a culture problem and we need to, really go back to the basics. But they needed to fix that employee concern, to fix the customer challenge. And then we sort of went back into the culture because it was on fire and, that needed to get resolved. So, I agree with you that, there's two ways. I think the optimal is to know your culture because that's going to drive absolutely everything else. It'll certainly make your life much easier. Just in the case of, the day-to-day of a, consultant, you're brought in to solve the, to solve what's on fire. But that's.
And I think often the metaphor, the story, the fix it fails. When you take system dynamics, like one of the archetypes is with like Peter Senge, what the fifth discipline. The fix it fails is an archetype where you have good intentions, but the way you approach it actually creates the seeds for what fails. I actually, having worked in consulting for many years, you see this often, unfortunately, which is the way the company goes after the change actually sets the seeds for failure because they don't pay attention to culture. And why do so many transformation initiatives fail? Whether it's digital or CRM or whatever, it's because they don't pay attention to culture and it's really not change management per se, because the best communications and change management playbook is going to fail too if it doesn't take a culturally driven lens. What does that mean? Ultimately, that means that if you think of it from a learning standpoint, if you create the space for change where people shift their mindsets and you communicate and you build a strategy vision and people buy in and you spend all the energy to get people to be open to change, and you talk about and you communicate about why change is needed, but then you don't actually take the time and energy to build habits and drive the behaviors, nothing happens.
I think the biggest challenge with change management in general is it's very often sort of done in these sort of locked away groups, right? And what I mean by that is, I can remember just so many times sitting, as a corporate leader, in rooms, and we're saying, all right, well, this transformation needs to happen. And the dates are defined less by kind of this real well thought out idea of how do we design it? How do we test it? How do we roll it out? And more about, all right, I'm looking at the Gantt chart. How do we push all of the lines sort of a bit more to the left? And so it's very randomized. And then, of course, you're compressing and taking out dates as it relates to the actual launch. The change management programs that I've seen work really at its best, and it is based on having that right culture in place. And by the way, also having strong training programs, strong communication, all of which are based on how the culture is affecting the across the place, is when you're bringing in the teams, especially the teams that are going to be impacted, so much earlier in the process, right? When you've got a culture of that sort of inclusion and collaboration, we have to remember that anytime you're doing any kind of transformation or any kind of change management, that whole experience mindset begins here as well. Bring those teams to the table, understand what are the current challenges now, help them understand how this transformation is going to actually help solution a lot of the challenges they're running into. But what have we not seen? What do we not know about? What are the things that we need to understand much more clearly earlier on? And then we do the testing, and then we get the I'm sorry, I'm blanking on the word. The MVP. Sorry, getting the MVP to be able to test out, make sure that it's working well. And then you can look at how that gets launched across the organization. But then the communication follows that as well. Can we communicate much more frequently, much more regularly, starting at an earlier time? Is there really a reason why we need to kind of gatekeep until the week before launch and then start teasing it? Because what ends up happening is it becomes a surprise. People aren't ready. Suddenly there's training that they have to complete. They're not entirely sure what's happening. And by the way, have they been readied from the perspective of, are their incentives updated? Are the metrics that they are measured on updated? Is the, are the systems getting shut off? Do they have to now sort of manage multiple systems as, this thing rolls out?
What you're highlighting is that like the system of change includes many things, and you can pick the places that you get the most leverage for the change that you want to focus your energy on. But like there's formal elements and there's informal elements. The formal elements are things like the org design, the KPIs and OKRs, the measurements, the who has decision rights, what type of data you're tracking. So like these are the performance management. These are formal mechanisms. And then there's informal mechanisms like people's mindsets, and you're using things like storytelling and coaching and feedback as a way of symbolic acts. These are ways of like informally driving change. And I think a lot of times people get wrapped around the axle around the formal measurement and the recognition and rewards and all these more formal things that create a lot of negative energy sometimes in the organization, are hard to implement and drive a lot of change. They can be very valuable, but they don't pay enough attention to some of the informal things. Like, can we get people to make commitments to practice these behaviors, these habits? And are we actually building a culture of giving people regular feedback and mentorship to practice the behaviors? Right. And often storytelling and symbolic acts and making commitments and practicing behaviors are most important to get the change to stick, not the formal incentives.
Absolutely. And look, the formal incentives, the measurements you need, right? Because that's going to be the hard data that tells you, how things are moving. So, it's not to
It's not
discredit.
enough on its own, is what I'm saying.
It's not, no, no, no. It's absolutely not enough on its own, because I think the other element, if you want to, going back to behaviors for a minute, even just from the human behavior perspective, people are tired. People are exhausted. And organizations are in constant state of flux, and especially these days, there's so much up and down. People are getting whiplash, not only by what's happening in the organization, but also just what's happening really in their world, politically, financially, socially, I mean, you name it. And so to the extent that an organization can take a bit more time to recognize that we as human beings just have a lot that's going on, what can we do to create some stability, right? First of all, there's a change that's happening. And so how do we not just lay it on you, on launch day, but rather bring in a story earlier on. Here's a challenge. Here's how we're remediating. Here's how it's going to help you. Here's how we're listening to you along the way. And then bringing in those stories and then figuring out those behaviors and then really just carrying that all the way through earlier on. I've just seen so many of these transformations fall on their face, because we're seeing these impossible deadlines, metrics that leaders feel like they have to hit. And so we just shortchange every step of the way when it comes to actually what is the human side of this change management. And we just turn it into a checkbox, a list of items to check off. And it just doesn't work. I've seen it happen time and time again.
Yeah, what we're talking about here, to bring it back to the 3-phase approach, is once you have the spark your movement and you've built alignment on the strategy, you've got clarity around the priorities for your brand, how to bring your brand promise to life through your CX, and the specific behaviors you want, ideally linking it to one of these cornerstone disciplines like quality management or agility or design thinking. Then you want to move into focusing your energy as a phase, which is really around putting in place and scaling your system of change around and driving the habit building and really scaling the movement among your people to drive the behavior. So where things often fall flat is there's not enough attention to having clarity on the behaviors, then actually scaling those behaviors into the organization. What really made me want to work more closely with Tamar on scaling this offering is her expertise in actually working within companies, helping build these cultural movements.
One of the biggest things that I have to say I take a lot of pride in that we did when we launched customer experience at Zoetis was we built this network of ambassadors. We were running into this really interesting challenge that, we had team members and colleagues that had been in the organization for 15, 20 years. And now, this person shows up one day and now suddenly I have a whole new set of behaviors that I don't really understand. And by the way, I've been doing my job just fine before you got here. Right. And so we had a lot of challenges. And honestly, it was a very fair reaction. Why should suddenly everything change? And so we did a couple of things. We did, first of all, we did a lot of ride-alongs that helped us, understand not only the customer experience and exactly what's happening, on the farms, in the clinics, but what the day-to-day of these employees were, what they actually have to go through, the miles they have to drive, the systems that they use, the tools that they have. And when we brought that back in-house, we were really able to then design and devise around a very human-centered approach that was based on fact, that was based on real life, that felt then tangible to the organization. We built then these ambassadors where we were able to train them, bring them in, help them understand what we mean by, when we talk about like our behaviors, when we talked about our end states, when we talked about our journeys. So they really became immersed in the language, in the understanding of what it was we were trying to do. And they were able to bring that back. We then sort of held these regular sessions where from across the organization, they were able to bring back, well, here's a challenge that I'm seeing. By the way, we're talking about this, but I think we need to change it this way. Someone else would come in and say, well, here's a best practice that I found. And they were able to almost teach each other. And that was really how we were able to get a lot of stickiness across the organization because it was real and it was tangible and there was ownership and there was a real kind of like drive to manage, both from a culture perspective as we rolled out different changes, as we were modifying the journey along the way. And it became kind of this really empowered group who were able to understand, then ultimately to be able to lead and really help me drive a lot of these initiatives forward.
That's a great story. Thanks for sharing that. I think it's really brings to life what we're talking about. And I can see your energy of how you want to bring that to clients in HaloEffect. And I'm excited that we're teaming together now. I guess in closing, if folks want to get in touch, is LinkedIn the easiest way for them to reach you, or should they send you an email or LinkedIn?
I mean, yes, yes, and yes. LinkedIn is probably the best. It also has a lot of content that we've been writing, talking specifically about EX and the intersection with CX. So there's a lot of thought pieces there as well.
Fantastic. And folks can reach out to either of us to set up time together with us. I mentioned we're collaborating on the Value Accelerator. You can also go to the JourneySpark Consulting website and the Value Accelerator page. And if you email us under contact us and indicate you want to talk about, work together with myself and Tamar, we'd be delighted to meet with you and have a free consultation and see if there's any sparks of inspiration that we can provide for you. So thanks again for joining today, Tamar. I know you've sparked great ideas for me, and I'm sure you have for the audience as well.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun.